Juniper Books presents The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD from his notes recorded at the time. Chapter 18.
15th of July, 2015. Oh God! It's only 5 o'clock. What idiot decides to mow their lawn in the bloody dark? Is that him then, the brother? Yeah, I could just about see him. What the hell? I'm cold. This place is sucking all the heat out of me. Then get back on the couch. What, and stink of old lady piss and dog all day? No thanks. It's not a bed of roses over here either. Oh God, I can't wait until we get on that bus. After another couple of hours between falling asleep again and generally chatting, Miss O'Day banged heavily on the door and invited us back into her house, where she had made porridge, and I have to admit that even though it was made with milk, that I thought was slightly off, I ate it hungrily, and so did Caroline, after which she gave Miss O'Day her gold cross in completion of the deal, and she handed over 20 £1 coins in a small plastic bag. Thankfully, her slow brother was nowhere to be seen, and at 9:15, after thanking our still suspicious host, we stood by a single metal pole which served as a staging post waiting for our ride. You know, how stupid have we been? Go on, tell me why. Because we didn't have to stay there at all. All we had to do was phone for a local cab to pick us up. Then I could have gone to a bank and paid him. No, that wouldn't have worked, Caroline. We could have gone to Inverness after the banks have closed, and that platinum card of yours wouldn't have worked in the cash machine, would it? Wrong date. Ah, true. To get access to my money, I would have had to speak to somebody. Oh well, it was a thought. Never mind you. We could have still pulled it off, because when we got out of the car, you could have taken us to another time. That's one way of not paying. Please tell me you don't take after Maximilian. That's a grossy little thing to do to a working man. Oh, get off your high horse. You defrauded the National Lottery out of millions. That's not the same. In principle it is. How much did you get out of them? That's irrelevant. Oh, really? What about those honest people that could have won it honestly? Are you trying to convince me that you, a member of one of the richest families in the world, care about the little people? Hey, you don't know the first thing about me. Don't lump me in with Maximilian. The first thing you told me was a lie. So why don't you answer me in American, perhaps in French American? That's if you can actually speak another language. I can speak many languages. I can speak German. Or what about Spanish? Okay, I took schoolboy language as well. Don't get out of your tree. Out of my tree? What does that even mean? I don't get you. One moment you're in prison with no hope of escape, then I help spring you, and this is the way you talk to me? Yeah, imprisoned by your brother. And that's got to do with me how? As I said, you don't know the first thing about me. You have no idea what it's like growing up within the shadow of Maximilian. I was about to ask, but the bus arrived and we spent several minutes boarding it and buying tickets. 6 passengers looked at us strangely as Caroline sat in a window seat and I sat next to her. My bout of bad temper was a surprise to me, but considering our condition and what we had been through since we arrived in 2015, I suppose I wasn't surprised. It had been ages since I had had a shower, and I think I smelt pretty foul. The coach wasn't slow, but it wasn't speedy either, and because it was summer, the views over the lochs and mountains were nothing short of spectacular. In fact, the view softened me. Sorry. So why don't you tell me about yourself? Not a great deal to tell, really. I was raised under a strong patriarchy, and Maximilian was the worst. I was nothing, and I wasn't allowed to have any say in any of the family businesses. My father left my mother almost as soon as I was born. I was expected to be educated to a specific level and then to become a pawn in the marriage stakes. I was expected to be nothing less. A woman married off to a wealthy foreigner for the purposes of cementing ties between the families. So you are engaged or something like that? The hell I am. When I turned 20, I came to my senses. That was my undoing, as Maximilian, in revenge, lowered my allowance, which paradoxically made me even more dependent on him. He is nothing more than a beast, and I'd like nothing more than to see him sent to where he'd suffer, if you know what I mean. Yes, I do know what you mean. You've made that clear. And it's for your benefit as well, you know, because he won't stop hurting you. He won't stop hunting you. He has resources you can't even imagine. I said I'd deal with him, didn't I? The only question is how. I'm thinking on it. Give me time. The bus came to the end of its travels close to the Eastgate shopping centre, which was convenient for Caroline's bank. And I have to say, it was so good to get back to civilization and for everything to look so normal. So normal, in fact, that we were the ones who stood out because we were still wearing the long black waterproof coats I stole from the 1940s, and it was far from cold. Therefore, we dumped them in an opportune recycle bin. Then we found a Barclays. I stayed outside as Caroline thought that might be best, and enjoyed watching the people of my time, or almost of my time. One thing I did notice almost straight away that truly surprised me was how few people there were walking about not on their phones or staring blankly at some screen. People were actually talking to each other. This made me wonder about my iPad in 2026 and what could have happened to it. I ought to have taken it, the new one, but I just didn't think. And then there was my original one. There was no personal details on it, but there were a lot of ideas. Still, the passcode could deter anybody from trying to unlock it, and all my stuff had been backed up on the cloud. I suppose the worst thing that could happen to it would be Maximilian jumping up and down, smashing it to bits in frustration. But probably a dangerous frustration. No. More likely getting a Scrooge to do it for him, as I couldn't imagine Maximilian doing anything strenuous. Caroline wasn't long and she joined me smiling. Went okay, did it? It did, once the teller saw how much was in the account. I gave them some story about losing my card, and once I was correctly identified, she couldn't do enough for me. I took out 1,000. That'd be enough to get some tickets, some food, and if we got time, to buy some new clothes. Should we get the tickets first? Inverness station was busy, I thought, considering how far up Scotland it was. But there again, it was summer, and from the looks of those in the station, many people looked to be tourists. Oddly enough, I found them rather easy to spot just by their clothes and overall expressions. I won't go into it in case someone finds my observations offensive. Anyway, 2 single first-class tickets were purchased, and as we had 2 hours before we could board, I found a clean cafe and ate a large cooked breakfast, or at least I did. Caroline was a little more fussy and just had eggs on toast, but we both drank 3 mugs of coffee each. As you can tell by my choice of words, things were now going well for us. After we couldn't eat anymore, we wandered from street to street until we found a suitable clothes shop where we both got a complete change of casual clothes. Out of date, but at least new. I found Inverness interesting, but by the time we walked back to the station, I felt no affinity with it. I imagined how cold it would be up there in the winter months, and perhaps how cut off it could be if it got snowed in and all the tourist spots were closed. No, not for me. Give me a New York summer. Yes, I still dreamed of that. with our former disagreement now forgotten. Now that we had been fed and were wearing clothes appropriate to 2015, we found our seats in first class and settled in for an 8-hour journey. The train departed exactly on time, and for the first half an hour I enjoyed looking at the ever-changing scenery, a patchwork of ridiculously high mountains, placid lochs, and huge areas of scrubland seemingly belonged to nobody but shaggy cattle and long-haired sheep. But slowly my eyes closed, given the constant gentle rocking of the train, and I drifted off to sleep, only being awakened by Caroline touching my shoulder. I awoke with a start to see our garden. Sorry, must have dozed off for a moment. More like an hour. What do you want for lunch? Here's a menu. I took it from the man with an embarrassed smile. The chicken, please. Same for me, thanks. The man nodded. I'll call you when it's ready, sir. You'll be in the first sitting. Dozed off for a moment. You've been snoring for about an hour. Do I snore? Nobody's ever said. You okay? Yeah, fine. Just thinking about what we've got to do and how we can do it. Come up with any ideas? A few. Still percolating. We won't pull in until 7:30 this evening, John. So we'll have to think about what we're going to do when we get there. Obviously, you are safe here, so that's where we ought to stay until we approach your family, don't you think? Of course. Now, I injured myself on the 28th of March 2026, so if we get to, say, the 20th, we ought to be able to save them. God only knows what I'm going to do with them. God knows how my father's going to react. Another bridge to cross, as and when. I'm sure it'll work out. Yeah, but in what way? What about their history as I remember it? What happens to that? Beats me. You're the time traveller. I may be, but I'm hardly an expert, Caroline. Although it was an express, it still stopped at a few stations, and at Perth, a large amount of travellers boarded, and I moved away from my window seat opposite Caroline and sat next to her, because a woman asked if it was okay if her young son had a seat next to the window. That was fine with me, and after a while I fell into the same deep sleep, only to be awoken by an intercom informing us that we had stopped at Glasgow Central. That wasn't surprising, but what was that Caroline had fallen asleep as well, and her head rested on my shoulder. The woman with the child looked at me from over the newspaper she was reading and gave me a smile before she continued reading, and I don't know why, but I let Caroline sleep on, waking her for lunch when the guard called us. She woke, slightly embarrassed of course, and apologised as she ran her hand through her hair, but I managed to catch her eye, and surprisingly, we had a moment. Lunch was excellent, and during it I could not help but notice the wildness that I had observed previously had now turned into a more recognisable, civilised pattern of farming. Gone were the blue and grey mountains and shaggy cattle. They had been replaced by ordinary cows and ordinary sheep grazing amongst the greenest of grass, itself punctuated by industrial towns and occasional pastoral villages. When we returned to our seats, I began to talk about something completely different. Sorry if I was disturbing you earlier. Do you believe in prophetic dreams? We all dream. I don't know about prophetic ones. Why? Before lunch I had a weird one, and it wasn't normal. Normal in which way? Most of my dreams don't make sense. It's just that, considering what we've experienced, I don't know. Go on then, what was it about? Well, I was walking along an ordinary street and everything was normal, except that I was holding this huge carving knife, like a kitchen knife. But then I realised it wasn't in my hand, and I thought I must have dropped it. So I retraced my steps looking for it, but I couldn't find it. And then this copper comes up to me, and although he didn't speak, I got the feeling that he was warning me off because he was pointing at the marks in my hand. That's all I can remember. It's just that dreams are usually strange bits and pieces and normally make no sense, but this one was in full colour, and the storyline, if I can call it that, was linear, and everything was crystal clear. That's it? Yeah. Weird or what? Don't ask me. Sounds like some kind of regret for damaging yourself. Perhaps the police represented your dad. Listen, John, I had a few ideas about what to do about Maximilian. Want to hear them? Go on, we have to talk about something. It's hours before we arrive. Just under 4, actually. And although the journey was relaxing, by which we actually didn't do anything physical, we stepped onto Euston Station along with hundreds of other weary travellers. We both agreed that we were exhausted. The station was busy with commuters leaving London, and we headed for the nearest cafe where we ordered coffee. Once we had those, we took a table. It's not all that different to 2026, is it? It was easy on the train, but now, looking at all these people, John, I find it hard to believe that what I'm seeing took place 9 years ago. If you think about it too hard, it feels like your dream, weird and unsettling. More so when I think that somewhere out there is a 15-year-old me learning to smoke. God, I'd like to meet her and tell how stupid it is. And you know she wouldn't listen to you, so stop thinking about her. Pretend it's 2026. I can't help but wonder what Maximilian is doing. If I remember right, your father died in 1976. Maximilian's father did, that's right. Oh, leaving Maximilian and your mother. You never mentioned her or your father. I presume your mother's not with you anymore? I've told you about my dad. I have no idea where he is, so we can forget him. Mother died in 2009 from a diseased liver. She was an alcoholic and had been for years. When she died, I was 8 and estranged from her, but I don't have any regrets. That's sad, but that's also not what your brother told me. What lies did he tell you? He told me that she had died from a sudden stroke. Stroke my arse. She was rotting away with a bad liver brought on by alcoholism. So, I suppose Maud is being taken care of. Who's Maud? Your daughter? What are you talking about? I don't have a daughter. Who told you I had a daughter? Maximilian. He told me that you got pregnant outside of marriage. Well, that's not bloody true. He's such a liar. What? Was he being nice to you at the time? He was, actually. We were drinking coffee at his London flat. He fooled me. Caroline, we could always take a detour on our way to Snaresbrook. And why would we do that? Her reply was quick and snappy. Well, you know. Do I have to spell it out? If by that you mean that we can visit my mother before the day her liver explodes, then that's a hard no. I've no wish to see or hear her at all, and that's all I want to say about it, okay? I nodded, not wishing to pour petrol on her obviously inflamed set of circumstances, but Caroline had evidently not finished. Just what the hell would I say to her anyway? Thanks for screwing up my life. Thanks for not standing with me against my brother as they took everything, leaving me with nothing. And thanks for not looking after me when I was ill or taking part in my education. Oh yeah, take me back there. I'd love to swap old stories with the woman who ruined my life. Sorry. You know, I had this friend at prep school and we got on so well. She was as clever as me and I was so embarrassed because my mother never visited and I told her that she was dead. We lost track of each other after school, but I bet she remembers the day I told her because it was a big deal and I cried. I'm sorry, Caroline. It was just a thought, seeing what I can do. Yes, well, you can keep that ability concerning my mother to yourself. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, thanks for the offer, though. You're sweet. I get the feeling that you believe everything can be solved by using those, don't you? She pointed to the marks as she spoke, and I looked from them into her eyes, noticing for the first time that she once had freckles. Maybe, but you are right. I ought to shut my own big mouth, because I haven't exactly brokered any sort of peace with my own father. As you'll probably see when you meet him, we don't get on either. So, we are a pair then. She placed her hand over mine and returned my gaze, and so intense was her look that I was able to see her irises clearly. I'm here to help you in any way I can, John. We can fix these problems together. I have to say that in all my life I had never been so attracted to a woman as I felt at that moment. And I swallowed and grinned, probably not the reaction she was expecting. I've said something funny? No, not at all. It's just that, well, I knew it before, but you can say that I just realised how beautiful you are. Sorry. What are you saying sorry for? It's a compliment. All women like compliments, so I'll say thank you. And there we had another moment as her hand rested on mine. But it was only a moment, as she became immediately practical. Okay then. So, I think it's probably too late to do anything now, don't you think? Yeah. So, what do you suggest then? Well, perhaps getting a good night's proper sleep would be a good idea, don't you think? I mean, it's not like we are on a schedule, are we? In a way, we've got all the time in the world. All the time in the world. That's what Philby said. Who's Philby? Oh, it's from a film, The Time Machine. One of my favourite films, made in 1960. That's what the Philby character said at the end. 1960. Wouldn't you like to go back there and see how it is filmed? I suppose I would. I suppose I could. That would be interesting. I admit that. God, even to go back to 1895 when H.G. Wells wrote it. Get myself a first edition. Which brings me nicely around to why did you try to destroy these things in the first place? I've told you already, Caroline. Let's not get into that again. Do you remember when I said that dealing with Maximilian was the reason I was helping you? I remember. It was only yesterday. Well, that was the main reason. And the other? Her hand was still resting on mine, and I began to feel a little warm as her stare seemed to drill into me. Do I have to spell it out? I think you might have to. Sorry, I've never been you idiot. Have you had many girlfriends? A few. Well, one. Back in college. It didn't end well. She then lifted up my hand and gently kissed the back of it. Have I made myself any clearer, John? Yes. Sorry. I didn't think you liked me in that way. Well, I do. Does that shock you? If it does, I don't know why. You're good-looking, intelligent, and that's two things a girl likes. I honestly didn't know what to say. Of course, I remember how pretty she was when I met her at the bank exchange, but honestly, what would a woman like that see in this old nerd? You really mean that? I wouldn't have said it if I didn't mean it, John. You're very cute when you blush, you know that. I'm not blushing. No, of course you're not. Okay then, should we get out of here? When we reached the concourse, we stopped. This good night's proper sleep you mentioned, what had you in mind? Get a hotel for the night and a fresh start in the morning. Why? Got a better idea? Well, no, not one that comes to mind straight away. It was not a problem finding a hotel in that part of London, although the type that was chosen was certainly not of the quality that Caroline was used to, and she spoke her mind to the receptionist as well, to my slight embarrassment. Naturally, there was the slight problem of whether to have one or two single rooms, but that was solved by a last-second decision by Caroline. That evening, We ate in the best restaurant Caroline could find after bemoaning that her favourite restaurant app hadn't been invented yet. But after another change of clothes and showering, when we met, she was in a far better mood. Moreover, Caroline had obviously been thinking a great deal about the entire process of travelling in time. After appetisers and wine had been ordered, she excitedly launched a number of questions at me. You know, one thing that frustrated my brother was the question of what actually travels. What do you mean? Well, for instance, he wanted to know why is it that holding on to somebody enabled that person to travel with you? You know, when you hold somebody's hand or arm. Okay. But he went further and wondered what exactly was the difference between your feet and your shoes, for instance. My feet? Of course it would help if we knew how it worked in the first place. Oh, I understand. You mean that, however it works, it manages to differentiate between me and something else. That's right. One of the things Maximilian wanted to try was for you to travel in bare feet, actually touching the ground. Because what would happen then? Would the entire earth travel with you, or just a small section, or none at all? When I used it for one of the first times, it was in the open, and I had Benny with me. Benny? My sister's dog. And he was on a lead, connected obviously to me, and he came with me, just as if I was in contact with him, as I would hold a person. But interestingly, the bench I was sitting on didn't travel. Or at least I didn't think it did. The experiment with the bare feet sounds interesting. No, I haven't a clue how the process works. I mean, when it happens, you don't end up in another time naked, do you? So what process differentiates between your skin and anything else that's connected to you? You got me. Like now, for instance, your arms are resting on this table. If you were to go, I don't know, say 500 years into the past, your jacket would go with you. But why wouldn't the table? I shook my head as her compsy arrived. Caroline, having a more mature palate than myself, dealt with the wine. It's not something I lose sleep over, but I'd be lying if I told you that too has crossed my mind. In the same way, if I went into the future by, say, an hour, it looks very much as if there is some unknown mechanism that prevents me from appearing or colliding with anything, people included. Now, not only do I not know how that works, but I can't even imagine how that could take place. That's so weird. So that's one of the things that Maximilian wanted to know about? Mainly, probably because of taking passengers. I mean, he's not in your class of intellect. He's the type of person who, once he gets his teeth stuck into a problem, hangs on like a dog. He's relentless and ruthless. But you've figured that out by now, haven't you? The idea that he could threaten my family, threaten to actually kill them, made me realise that. Previous to that, I thought he was just a nut job. He is a dangerous nut job. But you know, there is still one thing that confuses me. And that is, okay, he's reattached my arm, which returns my ability. What I don't understand is why he didn't foresee exactly what we've been doing. I mean, he made a big number mentioning the cameras and the algorithms and sending a message to his mobile so he could do whatever he had planned to my family, when all he had to do was exactly what we've done. It doesn't make sense. In 2026, he's informed by the algorithms that I'm no longer in the cell. So he sends a message to his goons, who report back that none of my family are where they think they are. He's lost. He's lost them, and he's lost me. If he's so clever, why didn't he take all that into consideration? I think I can answer that. Maybe he did. But you have to understand him, John. He may be relentless and ruthless, but I think that could be his Achilles heel. I think we can both agree that he's possessed of some sort of psychopathy. I mean, just the fact that I've witnessed him being so cruel tells me that. And like a lot of people with that condition, it's often possessing that condition that ultimately leads to their downfall, simply because they believe they are better in any way you want to describe. They think they are so clever that it's impossible for them to imagine anybody getting the best of them, so they end up being their worst enemy. Interesting theory. I think he probably think that, but imagined that you didn't have the intelligence to think of it. Of course, in 2026, having been informed that your family has disappeared, I would think he's more dangerous now than he ever was. Certainly more angry at being made a fool. But at least that won't affect us. When we get close, we'll go to the 28th of March 2026 and shift everybody out. I'm not exactly looking forward to that because I can foresee a problem with my father. You'll have to show him then what you can do. Exactly. And then there's the problem of where to place them, where they'll be safe. And remember, I have no money. Don't worry about that. I'll cover any expenses. Thank you. And when things get back to normal, I'll reimburse you. Well, let's see how that goes. Okay, different subject. Tell me more about the girl you dated in college. I can hardly believe it myself, but as we were saying goodnight before we entered our respective rooms, Caroline actually leaned in towards me and kissed me gently on the side of my lips. This was something I had wanted to happen, but never supposed it would. Her breath was warm, and given the amount of arousal I felt, I had no choice but to respond. But after kissing for an unknown period of time, she slowly withdrew and wished me a good night's sleep, and I think I had the right to smile as I undressed in my own room, for so many reasons. 16th of July, 2015. As breakfast was not supplied, after we had booked out, we ate in a local cafe and discussed exactly what we were going to do. As we talked, we held hands over the table, and at last I felt a sense of peace, something that had been denied me for years. Holding Caroline's small hand was better than moving into a multi-million-pound flat any day of the week. Can I be honest with you, Caroline? I would be offended if you weren't. I never imagined this would happen. I mean, me being close to a woman. I don't understand why not. You're a normal sort of guy, apart from your ability to travel in time, of course. Why did you say that? Oh, I don't know. I'm not the type of man whose company women normally enjoy. We've been through this, haven't we? I think the best thing you can do is relax and take things as they come. As I wasn't going to argue with that, all I did was smile, and then, saved by the waitress, our breakfasts arrived. Do you think we can afford to take a taxi to Snaresbrook? I said with an obvious smile. Oh, I think between our millions we might manage that. Now, do you have a plan for when we get there? I do, and it doesn't involve going to the house straight away. Luckily, the taxis in 2015 were not as sophisticated in terms of being connected to the internet, and that eased Caroline's fear that somehow Maximilian would be able to detect us. When we exited the black cab by the edge of the fields close to Eagle Pond, I directed us towards that copse of elm trees with which I was so familiar, and we stood there for a time as I once again related what happened to me. Standing next to the oak tree on this wide scrub of land in broad daylight, it was hard for Caroline to imagine a less imposing spot where something so immense had happened. This is it? This is it. I wonder if you went to the future, you'd see a statue of yourself, and underneath it would say, "Here is the place where John Crabtree was first contacted by time-shaping aliens." I can't imagine that happening. Besides, I think the first contact was in my parents' garden, unless that was the cancer. But it's still a dull place, John. There's nothing remarkable about this at all. Even the pond's dried up. I can remember when ducks and swans used it. My father can remember sons and their fathers used to play with their toy boats. But then I think the internet spoiled all that. Did he bring you here to play with boats? You must be joking. Play? I never played at anything. Not from about 5 years old and up. Studying and reading was my playtime. And if I used a computer, it was only to write programs. That's sad. Truly, that is, John. Well, that's the past. Now we better go to it. Did you like that seguo? Not smooth, but worth a try. Okay, let's do this. We were huddled within that copse of elm trees. There was not a need to be concerned about being seen, and I offered my arm to Caroline. I concentrated on the date, but then Caroline gripped my arm tighter. John, what is it? If this doesn't go the way I want it to go, I just want to say that I'm sorry about all the things I did before. Writing that report to the editor exposing you. It was a weak moment of madness. I was angry. Thanks. And I'm sorry sending you to a Victorian Fleet Street. I wish I could say it was truly in the past, but, well, look, it was all in the past. Looking into Caroline's beautiful eyes, I reminded her to close them, which she did. Moments later, I did, to avoid the abrupt changing levels of light. Instantly it became colder, and a gust of wind buffeted us. We had arrived. 28th of March, 2026. It took us no longer than a few minutes to walk to my parents' house, and as I was about to push the front garden gate open, I saw Julie, a neighbour and friend of my mother, wave to me nonchalantly, and I offered her a wave in return. Let's keep moving. I don't want to get stuck with her. She'd talk you to death given the chance. She seems okay. Yeah, but she's also very lonely. As I believe I've mentioned previously, my parents' house was built in the 1920s, and it was a corner property, was larger and more imposing than the other high-priced houses in the street. Being that it was approximately 7:15 in the morning, both my parents' cars, as well as my old ones and Maggie's, were parked in the drive. Caroline noticed that I began to walk slower the closer I got to the house, until she was almost tugging on my arm. John? Oh, crap. This is not going to be easy. My father didn't understand the last time, and he won't today either. Do your parents have that much control over you? It's my father more than my mother. Just spend 5 more minutes with him and you'll see. But you know you'll have to demonstrate what you can do so that they can go with you. I've done that already. It's just that he already thinks of me as someone not really attached to the family like my sisters. Once he sees again what I can do now, I fear that we'll be completely estranged. I'm sorry about that, John, but we're here to make that kind of difference. Who's that? I glanced at one of the downstairs windows belonging to the drawing room and saw Zoe waving frantically. That's my youngest sister. There'd be no need to knock now. And there wasn't, as the front door was opened by Zoe, who smiled wildly at me. Hiya. What are you doing here this time of the morning? Who's this? Zoe, this is my friend Caroline. Where is everybody? Getting ready. Mum's in the kitchen with Mrs. Blob. Don't call her that. She'll hear you one day. I think she knows already. I don't care. Why is she here so early? Mum and Pop's got something on. Something on? What? Oh, some work stuff. They're going to be away all day. The wide hallway looked the same as it always did, and Caroline and I walked to the kitchen where I found my mother preparing breakfast and brewing coffee. She looked as surprised to see me as Zoe had, and smiling, she hugged me, which came as a surprise considering the previous time when she visited me. "John, this is a surprise. Mother, this is Caroline, a friend." The women shook hands after Caroline had offered hers, and there was a moment's silence. "Have you had breakfast? We were just about to have hers." "Mother? Where's father?" "Trying on a new suit. He'll be down in a minute. Zoe, tell your father that John and his friend are here. Do you want some coffee?" We did, and we took it and walked into the breakfast room, where Maggie already sat listening to music using her headphones. Her eyes sprang open with surprise as she turned off her mobile and stood. "Hey, this is a lovely surprise. Oh, why are you here? Has Mum and Dad said anything to you about you-know-what?" "This is my friend Caroline, and she knows everything. Have you said anything about what happened in my flat?" Maggie nodded and sat again. "You know we did. When they got home after visiting you, well, God, you could have cut the air with a knife. They had a really bad row. We just couldn't keep it a secret. Not that. It was killing Zoe not to say anything, and, well, you know what Dad's like. So they already knew what happened when you visited. Pretty much. I'm sorry. But did Father believe you?" "Of course not. He was more concerned about the crowd that outside. Dad's more rational than anybody I know. Of course he didn't believe us. He thinks we were drunk or on drugs or just lying. That was a bad night here. But you can tell him now, can't you? You can show him properly what you can do." "And what is it that you can do?" Mr. Crabtree's deep and mature voice cut through our conversation. "Good morning, John. Rather early for a visit. Who is this?" "Morning, Father. This is my friend Caroline." They exchanged polite nods as my father pulled out his chair. "So, don't wait to be asked to be sit. Are you taking breakfast with us, Caroline?" "If that's okay." "It is. So, John, it's not even 8 o'clock. I'm intrigued to know what you're doing here this time of day." I was silent because I didn't know how to start. "Have you arrived to explain why my daughters lied to me about the time they spent in your flat?" I still remained silent until Caroline nudged me. After taking a sip of coffee, I replaced the cup on the saucer and began to speak, but I wasn't able to look at my father. "I don't know exactly what Maggie and Zoe told you, Father, but they've told you what happened. Then that's exactly what happened. You saw it yourself." "I saw nothing. Now, your mother and I are attending a symposium today at Bart's, so we will be away all day. I expect you will be long gone by the time we'll return. It won't be till late this evening." "No, Father." "No, Father? Did I hear you correctly?" "You did. I mean, you can't go. We have to..." I trailed off, as I was prone to do under difficult circumstances, but then Caroline's voice cut through the silence. "For God's sake, John, show him again. Better than faffing about trying to explain. Go on." I could see my father's expression change in a way with which I was so familiar, but doing my best to ignore him, I stood and passed my left hand over my right. "I'm sorry, Father." And I was sorry as well, because I knew that after my second demonstration, his life and my mother and my sister's would never be the same. He wouldn't be able to walk away from me this time. But I wasn't there simply because I loved them and wanted to protect them. Yes, even my father. After a series of flashes, everybody simply vanished. The breakfast things disappeared, along with the white tablecloth, and for the few seconds I was there, the house was dark, cold, and silence. Dark because the curtains were closed. I had appeared one day in the future, and part of me was glad because Maximilian's G-men would find the house unoccupied. But another part was saddened because I knew at that time, somewhere in London, in a place as yet undecided or even discussed by Caroline and myself, I was babysitting my parents and my sisters. So with these heavy and reluctant thoughts, I touched the return mark and returned to absolute chaos. Although I was away for less than 5 seconds, 10 at the most, it was just unfortunate that my vanishing act coincided with my mother and Mrs. Glass entering, carrying a tray of scrambled eggs, bacon, slices of toast and coffee. As my mother was first through the door, she saw me disappear and dropped her tray. My reappearance coincided with Mrs. Glass witnessing it, and she too, not knowing what was happening, dropped hers. And while mother kept shouting, "No, no, no," Mrs. Glass's eyes rolled upwards and she simply fainted. Hence the chaos with food scattered everywhere. While Caroline, Maggie and my father rushed to help, I stood still like a bloody frozen statue, forgotten by everybody, until Caroline remembered me. She told me later that the expression on my face at that time was unique. And all I can remember of those few seconds after I had given my second demonstration was Zoe, who was staring at me and smiling, and as she had said, "Cool." With some effort, Mrs. Glass was brought around and she was lifted into a chair, where my father spoke to her quietly as she listened intently, and then after a few seconds she got to her feet, stabilised herself and left the room. A few seconds later we heard the front door open and close, and that was the starting pistol for my father to glare at me as he began to attend to my mother's ashen face, who was looking the worst for wear as I ever remember her being. After Maggie forced her to take a few sips of coffee, my father walked over to the fireplace, his hands in his pockets in his new suit, his back to us. "Father," I ventured. "Father, I had no choice. I came here to take you all away because you are in danger. Caroline, help me, say something." She did more than talk. She walked over and taking my father's arm, she turned him as if he were a mannequin. "Hi, what John said is true. He didn't want to come here and scare you, but his life and his family are in danger. You can't stay here. You've got to believe him this time. You have to get together a few things, enough to last a couple of weeks, and you have to go into hiding. That means everybody." "John, what have you done? Is this about drugs?" "No, Mother. Please listen to Caroline and do what she asks. We all have to leave here as soon as possible today. It's really important. Please." Finally, my father turned round properly. "Annabella, when you feel up to it, you and Maggie put some things into a rucksack. Zoe, do the same." "But Dad, what about school?" "And my job? Just do as you are told. No comebacks." As soon as the room emptied, Caroline began to clear the mess on the floor and returned to the kitchen, leaving me to face my father. "For the moment, John, give me a brief summation of the facts. That's all I require." Not to my surprise, a brief summation of the fact was impossible, as one fact led automatically to a question. But after 10 minutes, my father got the essence of what had happened to me after my operation. He made no comment when I mentioned the white creature, but he closely inspected those 10 inscrutable marks in the form of a square that he had seen often, and which he had regarded as just a momentary loss of discernment. They look exactly like tattoos, and nobody understands how they work or what they are. Nobody, Father. They seem to be beyond everybody's comprehension. I suppose that would be the case if they came from a higher intelligence. What are those scars? Oh, there's something else, Father. Perhaps later you are taking this more calmly this time than I imagined you would. Perhaps I am. Without that demonstration, I'm sure I would not be. Last time was... Where did you go to just then? To tomorrow. One day. The house was empty, the curtains closed. My father sat. So what plans have you? And why can't we simply call the police? Because I think there's a decent chance that this Maximilian has the police in his pocket. He seems to have control over so many things. That's an unusual name. Maximilian. What's his surname? Nibley Dawson. You've heard of him? I have. He's been mentioned in political circles recently. From what I read, he's brokered some sort of arms deal between Russia and China. It's a very distinctive name, Maximilian Nibley Dawson. My God, boy, what have you got yourself mixed up with? It was he who approached me, Father, not the other way round. Caroline is his sister. Did I mention that? No, you didn't. Is that the Caroline that you said began it all with the article? Yes, but things have changed now. There's no love lost between them. She's firmly on my side. It's a whole new story. So I repeat, what plans have you got? None. It's just my intention to let you know what's going on and persuade you to vacate here so they won't find you when I escape from that prison. Bloody hell. That was one of the rare times I heard my father swear, and I pursed my lips in embarrassment. Right. I'm going to compose a few emails. Help your mother and begin to shut up the house. Better turn off the gas and electric and close all the curtains. I'll email Mrs. Glass as well, poor woman. Father, what did you whisper to her after she fell? A kind of necessary white lie. I told her that she ought to do something about her condition. I scared her. I thought that would be kinder, if not safer for us, than telling her that my son had been visited by aliens and had been gifted with the ability to travel across the centuries. Sorry, Father. Perhaps I worked you too hard as a child. Perhaps these things saw your intelligence and thought, we will park a gift onto this one. Listen to me. Today I was going to give a lecture on management practice in a time of crisis, and now I'm babbling on about aliens as I'm preparing to leave my own house for heaven knows how long. His original Scottish accent was noticeable by now, and I knew better not to talk back. Sorry, Father. Go on. Do what I said. Upstairs, everybody was busy, and I found Caroline in my old bedroom, and from the look she gave me, it was clear she had something else on her mind. Of course, she didn't hold back from expressing it. Why do you let him talk to you like that? Sorry this, sorry that. You aren't a child anymore, John. Why do you take it? Listening to the way he speaks and the way he treats you, I tell you, it's sickening. You take a lot from him. You ought to grow a pair. He's the main reason why I left in the first place. So instead of dealing with it as a man would, you ran away? A tight nugget of anger began to twist in my belly, but I couldn't say anything. You know what they say, John? If you don't deal with your demons, sooner or later they will deal with you. Not if I keep running. John, I think a lot of you. I don't like this side of you at all. Stand up to him. Stop apologising and start saying no. And start calling him Dad, not Father, for God's sake. What is the worst thing that he can do to you now that you are independent? Caroline was about to pack my clothes, but I stopped her. No. It's bad enough that you see me at my worst. I don't want you rummaging through my underwear as well. Would you go round and close the curtains in the house, please? Okay, sure. But did you hear anything that I just said? What happened between you two just then? I told him everything. Well, the merest details anyway. He's on board. Look, I think it has to be a hotel, don't you? Either that or a big tent in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere. You know, that's not such a bad idea. I was joking. No, but you might be right. Let me think about that. Can you do the curtains, please? As long as you think about what I've said. A promise. A will. Although my parents were what you might call efficient, all the same, dealing with their and my sister's appointments and generally closing up the house took longer than I would have wished. It wasn't that we needed to be in a rush, or indeed we had to vacate that day, but I honestly felt the need to remove ourselves as soon as possible. Caroline's foolish remark, though, had given me a new idea, though it was born out of nothing but paranoia. My thinking went like this. Realising what resources were available to Maximilian, I could quite easily see a situation whereby he could do the same trick as before, whereas he would place a watch on hotels. That had obviously caused my downfall. All he had to do, when he was told the house was empty, was for his minions to report if a family of our size and number had booked into a hotel or guest house, and that would be the end of my plan. No, something else was needed. Squeezing us into our father's land Toyota was difficult, but was at least doable. And after telling my parents of my idea, and surprisingly we found them amenable to it, we set off northwards out of the suburbs towards Epping in the county of Essex, where, on the outskirts of the GPS, directed us to a company called Essex Motorhome Hire. So that was my answer. We would live in the most spacious mobile home money could buy, always on the move, so that not even our phones will be able to give away our position, as long as we switched them off when we parked overnight. Caroline thought it genius, but I wouldn't go that far. Clever thinking maybe, but genius? I don't think so. And furthermore, my parents thought it a shrewd move as well, as neither offered any objection. Apparently, back in the day, in the early days of their romance, camping was apparently okay. The chap who owned the motorhome business began to chat, thinking that we were a normal family, but quietened down a little when he saw how intense I was. At first I was disappointed when he mentioned that he was in the business of hiring, not selling. However, after I flashed my platinum card, saying that my only option was to buy, I saw the pound signs in his eyes, and his attitude changed almost as if by magic. And, as if by magic, or more likely a stroke of luck, he told me that he had only recently taken delivery of a new vehicle that had only 10 kilometres on the clock. Moreover, it slept 6, and quite honestly was about 10 times more luxurious than what had been my digs at uni. Seriously, this had everything that anybody could want. Talk about travelling in style. Yes, it came to 6 figures on the road, but seriously, what was money? If it came down to it and I lost my ability to make any more using my gift, then I could always sell it again. But it was a monster. It was more like a single-decker bus. Therefore, my only concern was driving it, as I had never driven anything with such a long wheelbase. But I need not have worried, as my father naturally took over. Once the full purchase amount had been deducted from my card, the owner could not do enough. He called in 2 of his minions from his workshop, and all too quickly they, plus his wife and daughter, were filling up the tanks with fresh water, diesel, and provided a whole heap of provisions which we bought, while the engine and other mechanical, electrical and electronic systems and services were checked. As we sat in the waiting room, making sure our insurance would cover the beast, as Zoe had named it, and discussed in which direction we were going to go, even I was surprised, yet again, at how powerful money was. I think the owner would even have sold us his daughter if I had asked, because beneath his sycophantic manner it was easy to spot his grasping, squeamish personality. Yet I understood. Living out there in the sticks, his offer to make a 6-figure number probably didn't come within his grasp every day. Although we chatted and discussed where each of us wanted to go, You won't be surprised to learn that my father made the decision for us. And overall, it wasn't such a bad one, as Scotland was as far away from London as it was possible to go. Therefore, with a tank full of diesel, Father eased the beast out of the company forecourt onto the B1393 and steered it towards the M11 and Cambridge. All too quickly we found our favourite places to sit after we had fully explored the vehicle, and kilometre by kilometre we settled into life on the road. Although it had first-class cooking facilities, there was not a chance in hell that my mother was going to cook anything, as she all too quickly let us know that as far as she was concerned, this was a long overdue holiday. She might boil the occasional egg and supply toast, but for anything else we were going to eat out. As we had full internet access, not surprisingly, not one of us missed being stationary at all. All too quickly, Maggie was video conferencing with Sam and her friends after a strict lecture by me not to give away our heading or where we were. Zoe was doing her schoolwork, and the rest of us did online what we normally did. Cambridge came and went, and that was only one of a number of large cities that we avoided as we drove north. Not for the obvious reason of being spotted, but because my father had the sense to realise that driving the beast through the middle of cities was just plain stupid. My father at least recognised his limits, and the beast, in length at least, certainly lived up to its name.
You have been listening to an audio production of The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD.